bounce back. Like this is something I've been wondering about for a while. I've seen talk about how providers are handling caching for their own cost savings, but I haven't seen a lot of discussion about how people are solving it from the app layer so that they can save on API costs so that they can, you know, reduce the amount that they end up having to call out to inferencing. So it's interesting, it's valuable. I haven't dug into it at all. I mean, I have a software engineering background, which means I just have some concept of how complex caching can be. And like, there's the classic joke of like, there's two hard problems in software, naming things caching and off by one errors. But basically, caching is a really hard problem. So I'm really curious what solutions you have in place. And I'm sure you'll be getting into all that. There's almost no end to how deep into the rabbit hole caching can go for optimization. And there's diminishing returns at a certain point. But from what I've seen in the conversations on channels so far, it's probably still pretty provisional, pretty early. You're getting the first 80%. You haven't hit the 20% tail yet. So I'm looking forward to seeing more. Show us what you got.
Right on. So I think that one point that you said there about, I think where this might be interesting for folks in here is with the coding agents. I'm assuming that the way that Claude are approaching this, or Anthropic are approaching this, is different to GPT, and maybe the caching has something to do with that. If you're building like a coding harness, or you want to build like a coding wrapper, Anthropic charge very differently. Like you have to structure things differently, and the caching savings, yeah, the writes are at 1.25. It's more expensive to write to cache, but it's like significantly cheaper to read from cache. So if you're building a coding agent and you set up the initial system prompt in the harness well, then it's going to be probably like you're going to be paying 10% of what you'd normally be paying for a read from cache. That'll probably make sense if I explain a little bit more. So this is the technical part that I didn't fully understand and I didn't go into. So if anybody here has a good technical explanation, please jump in. Basically what happens when write to cache, or when one of the providers is caching input, is it's basically not storing verbatim the input, right? It's just basically storing a frozen state, and it needs to be exactly the same. So the prefix needs to be exactly the same for a cache hit to happen. Otherwise, if you refeed in the prompt and it's different in any way, like a tool call is different, then the cache will miss the state that was being stored. It would change the output. Anyway, that's not the case. I tested it multiple times and I think I hit that down here. So I just tried to put this table together. So with Claude, you do have to specify the cache control markers, and you only get 4 breakpoints, and you have to explicitly mark the sections, whereas that's not the case with ChatGPT. Everything with ChatGPT is implicit. You don't have to do anything. And Google, you can choose with Gemini. They're the 3 models that I tested with. So yeah, reasons to provide, I'm calling this provide a cache, because obviously you can set up your own middleware to do your own caching. When I say provide a cache, I'm just meaning if you're just using the provider APIs, it's probably a better way or a better term for it. I don't know what it is. And it's cost and latency. It's not context and performance. So I thought, I mean, the more interesting part here is context and performance, like agentic memory, which maybe we can talk about different solutions later, but I'll just go through what I found with the provider side caching. And then if any of this is like too basic knowledge for you guys, feel free to jump in and we can move forward. I won't go through the notebooks, the basic ones. Does that sound good? Yeah.
Yeah, keep rolling.
Cool. So I just did a quick refresh on the context window. This probably sounds really basic, but I was also getting a little bit confused with this. The idea here being, I think a lot of people forget that the provider API is stateless, so you have to feed back in the prompt and the system message every time. If you want the cache to hit for all the providers, you have to make sure that the initial inputs remain the same. If you're changing tools or you have some kind of dynamic system message, then it's going to break the cache. And then the thing here is that the pricing is also going up linearly. So you're paying for the same system message each time unless you get that cache hit. the dollars rack up really quickly and latency becomes a problem. So yeah, I thought it's worth just spending a little bit of time in this provider differences with provider caching, because it is quite important. Like, I didn't even realize Claude won't work with caching unless you set these manual cache controls in the code. You have to explicitly mark the sections that you want cached, so you have to think more carefully about which sections that you want to do it with. ChatGPT does everything automatically for you. As soon as you exceed the 124 tokens, it'll start caching. And then with Gemini, you can select if you want to have implicit or explicit caching markers. I think one problem I had was I'm using OpenRouter in my app, and they have different control measures for Anthropic. I couldn't get it to work. I don't know if anybody else has had luck with this, but I
So
can,
I
if I
assume you've had
call
to
the,
like lock in the provider and all that kind of stuff too, right? Because I assume if you're hitting the same endpoint in OpenRouter and they give you slightly different providers, but these are all like frontier models, so they might actually not have other providers. I've actually never tried to hit like the frontier models on OpenRouter. I usually use it for like open weight stuff, where I'm just trying to like do some cheap experiments.
right, yeah, I'm using the, like my whole app runs on this,
Okay.
and it routes to the different frontier models. Like I've got 4.5 Sonnet and 4.0 Mini and Flash, and it's all being routed through OpenRouter. But I'm going to probably have to stop that unless I can get the cache control to work for Claude. So from my testing, I don't know why. I don't know if it's just a work in progress or if I'm doing something wrong. But yeah, basically, like ChatGPT, the models work fine. And I can also even get back from OpenRouter the caching costs and caching hit information. But with Claude, with Anthropic, I was just having a lot of trouble getting caching to work through OpenRouter. So I had to just call directly to the Anthropic API for that.
I mean, that makes sense. If they like, since OpenRouter is trying to provide like a simple surface level API for all these different providers and all these different models, then the complexity of caching, like I was joking about before, like hard problems in software. Yeah, like not having a software background and you're diving into one of the hard problems of software, like bravo. This is interesting too, because you've mentioned testing a few times, and I really want to hear more about like how you're testing this and how you're like seeing the behavior and confirming things are working the way you expect them to, because that's kind of the nature, I think, of like modern software is thinking about things more behaviorally than all the specific implementation details.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So I actually forgot. I'll put the notebooks in the Discord. Also put the prompt caching link for OpenRouter there. You might want to strip out one of the notebooks and pop in the API keys and test yourself for your specific implementation. The way that I'm testing is I was just checking my OpenRouter bill initially, which wasn't such an effective use of my time.
Testing strategies, it's always going to start a little bit more on the rough end, and then you
Yeah,
refine it over time and you get better tactics and strategies. I remember getting into TDD with colleagues who had never really done test-driven development before and traditional pre-LLM software. And this is years ago. And I was like, all right, well, let's start from how are you going to click through the app, and let's write an actual markdown file or just a text file. Like, what are you doing? What are you clicking? How are you knowing it's behaving correctly? And then that starts turning into more advanced testing. But it always starts at the surface and the simplest. So you were literally like, I'm going to try a thing. Did they bill me
yeah,
for it? No. Cool. Caching worked.
yeah. I mean, just a quick side question on that,
Hack
I
the
guess.
planet,
Like,
man.
yeah, yeah, that's right. I'm interested because, as I said, I don't have a software engineering background, so I took a course a little while ago on building LLM applications, and actually Swix came in and did a guest lecture, and they were talking about this idea of the software development lifecycle with LLMs, and how sometimes it is easy just to spin up a Jupyter notebook and try to simulate parts of your application as quickly as possible. Is that what you're finding? Have you transitioned into more AI stuff, or was that always the case?
I haven't really been diving too deep into Jupyter Notebooks yet. because I'm still always like I have habits and patterns that I'm usually following when I'm developing stuff that I often will end up with like a test file and an implementation file, and then I'm kind of
Hmm.
treating them as two separate things to bounce against each other.
Hmm.
I also am like relatively new to Python because I've done programming in Ruby and Golang and early JavaScript. So now it's like I'm learning the patterns and idioms of the Python community, and one of them is like everyone loves Jupyter Notebooks because they're just so easy to understand. Like it's really clear and you can kind of follow the cookbook in a very easy to digest way. That's actually relatively new to me. While you're saying some of the stuff might be so basic to all of you, there's a lot of other people who are not coming from a software background or who are coming from a software background, but a lot of this stuff is so new and different, or it's a different tech stack than we're used to that we're all figuring it out.
Yeah, we're all figuring it out. That's why you just got to put it out there sometimes. I'm just trying to do my part to reduce the slop from vibe coding. So I appreciate these
Right. You
calls.
humility check passed. Keep going.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I mean, some of the gotchas that I put here are important as well. The writing and reading costs are important. So with Claude, it costs a little bit more to write to cache, whereas to read from cache, it's like a 90% discount. So that's kind of the biggest takeaway from this whole thing for me is if you can beef up the system prompt in an effective way, and then you're going to read from it multiple times, then it can be really cheap to use these Claude models where they're usually more expensive. And then there's just a bunch of other small specifications that are important to know, just like you can actually set time refresh in Anthropic so that the cache pushes out to an hour rather than 5 minutes. And then different providers have different time measures there. The tool calling. So if you're going to append tool call, this is interesting for the coding agents. This is the same for the different models. If you're appending tool calls during the run, it's going to break the cache or invalidate the cache. So you kind of want to set things up where you have a specific hierarchy in the system message for tools that you want to allow for the agent before that runs. And then that way you're going to be able to cache that at the start, and it can be relatively cheap, especially if you're using one of these Claude models.
Let it ride.
Right, nice. For me, this is a better way to understand kind of the savings here. Like if you're feeding in a massive system message, doesn't necessarily have to be a book, but the example they use here is a book, you can kind of see the cost reductions here. So let's just say that you're chatting with Claude and you put in like a whole book, or for me, a whole podcast transcript rather than chunking and embedding it. You're getting these massive reductions here in latency and cost. So 90%, I put in a whole book, I ask a question, I ask a follow-up question, it's going to be 90% cheaper on those following prompts and calls, and the latency is going to be nearly 80% improved. So yeah, my initial thought on this for my app, and I've been testing this in the notebooks, was I can probably sub something like Anthropic back in, providing that I set up the system message and initial prompt well. And it also made me think about those conversations with Boris from Claude Code. Like a lot of what they're doing now is just basically giving the coding agent access to a bunch of markdown files. I don't know what the system prompt is like for Claude Code. Maybe somebody else knows that, but I'm assuming it's probably like playing into the direction of feeding a lot of information up front in some cases so that that prompt cache hits.
For what it's
Um,
worth, I think somewhere in scrollback, someone had shared like I don't know if it was a leaked prompt or someone had found a way to like extract some version of it, but like it's vaguely out there if people wanted to like try to correlate that with what you're saying. But like, yeah, like I remember seeing announcements recently from Code, which is they're very open about everything they're doing and they have a really strong Discord and like good community engagement. They have almost every single time they're sharing how much they're making changes around caching because man, like if you're paying per token on some of these IDEs, the cost can get bonkers if you're not careful. And that's where caching is like really important. I mean, like Anthropic has an incentive to fix their caching because they're charging a flat fee up front and they're giving a lot of inferencing. But like when you're paying every single time, or you're running an application that is paying every single time, caching matters.
can you see the article that I pulled up here?
Yep.
Yeah, so this was kind of confusing for me, but this is, I don't know if you guys know Menace. It's like an agentic. They basically said here, like their number one tip was design around the KV cache. This is where I got confused. This is what made me think that maybe caching fixed context, but yeah, it's just basically to do with latency and cost. But I guess it's a big deal for all of these, like the providers and any of the agentic tools. I shared a link if anyone wants to take the notebooks, they can. I won't run these notebooks now, but basically I just set up notebooks to show how the caching works. So just like multiple turns of conversation, I can select different models here and then just run like a multi-turn conversation and see where the cache hits. And then right at the end, I just print the results. So that's pretty straightforward. I did it directly with those different models there. I couldn't get the caching to work in some cases for Anthropic, so I set up a direct one for Claude. So I'm actually more interested, and I think that this is the more interesting part in, did someone say something in the chat? Observationally and cursor, the caching is worlds better with GPT-5 than any Anthropic model, my guess is a response. Yeah, okay, so this is something I didn't hit on, I didn't look into. I guess what happens with Responses API is it takes care of the caching for you in a sense, right? Because if I'm understanding correctly, it provides state to the API, so you're not even having to worry about making sure that the prefix is maintained the same for the cache hit. Am I understanding that correctly? I'm not using the Responses API.
I don't know. I haven't dug into that yet either. Man, there's
Yeah, I
just too
just,
much.
is that right, Cable? I don't know if you're on a call.
Yeah, sorry, I'm on my phone, so I'm sort of trying to keep up here. So my impression is Responses API is kind of an evolution of what they did with their Assistance API, where it is a stateful API and they are managing the threads themselves. That means they can do all sorts of caching. The other piece of that is that they're not only caching what you're putting up there and the final results, but they're caching a lot of the thinking tokens and things like that for you. So even if those aren't exposed to the end tool, it's kind of helped or kept automatically. So yeah, it definitely seems like they're moving in a stateful direction and saying caching is key. We want to manage that. We want to manage that all inside of our servers for you.
Yeah, this is like, are you allowed to swear on this? Is this like a child friendly? I was just going to say, this is why it's so fucking difficult, because if the other providers move in that direction, then all of this is kind of a waste of time in terms of where you set up the caching headers and stuff for Anthropic. So yeah, I don't know how much effort you want to put into really architecting for cache hits now when other providers might go in that direction. Anyhow, because also like you got to think about, I guess, what's happening with the, if you've got an agent or an agentic system with heaps of tool calls, and then do you want tool call failures also appearing in the context? Do you want the reasoning traces appearing in context? Big decisions, and probably the providers are going to want to start abstracting some of that away. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on that, or I'll keep
So
going.
that sounds like it means that, I mean, if tool calls, I assume MCP stuff is also built like the entire context. So if you have some sort of state saving MCP where like you're actually writing and reading from it, that actually has to get replayed every single time somehow. Like maybe I might just be tripping because it's like the end of the day on a Friday and I've had a long week. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I
again,
think
caching is hard.
caching is hard. Yeah, Alessio brought it up they talked about it in the conversation as well. What Lance was saying in the podcast was some of these providers they're offloading tool calls and tool specifications to file, but I'm assuming that as soon as you use a tool or call a tool, that trace has to then be put into context. And then if you want to take that out to prevent context rot, then you're going to break the cache. But if codex is really good, then maybe they're doing something there where they can take care of that for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some really interesting things to explore here. Like one of the big areas where I see a lot of I'd say opportunity / confusion, but that also interacts oddly with here is like ChatGPT caused everyone to think about interacting with LLMs as a chat. And they didn't help by creating the like chat completions API. And it's all like reinforcement learning around looking like a chat. We have done a lot of experimenting both in this discussion group and then the company that I work at, our team has done a lot of experimenting with trying to break out of that model and like really just treat it as this is a computational engine that can do different things. So that often ends up breaking the chat paradigm by rewriting history, right? By saying, oh, like you thought you had this conversation, let me change what that looks like, right? Let me change what the underlying data is. The fact that it looks like a conversation in a snapshot doesn't mean you have to treat it like that. But to your point, if especially with something like the responses API, the responses API continues down that path where it says, if you opt in to modeling your interactions with this LLM as a conversation, as a series of things, we'll manage that for you and we'll make the caching just work. And so I think there's an interesting tension there of like, that pushes us further down what I believe to be a relatively limiting mental model for interacting with LLMs. LLMs are, powerful computational tools. Treating them just like conversations misses a lot, but it does give you a heck of a lot of performance for free. And that might actually counterbalance it enough to say like, okay, sure.
I didn't think of it in that framing of a conversational model. Yeah, that makes complete sense to me. That was intuitively the feeling that I got as a beginner, but somebody who's building something, I want the freedom, and it feels better for me to try and think more carefully about the context and the tool calls and the structure and the hierarchy and not outsource that to one of the providers. So I hope you're right. I hope you're right in
Yeah,
that.
this is just really interesting to me thinking about like the abstraction, right? Like you were saying, K-ball, like it's it feels like a conversation in some ways, but it also doesn't feel like a conversation in other ways. And sort of shoehorning it into conversation and saying this is the abstraction that we want to use to understand how to interact with these things can be limiting. In that limiting way, it might have some gains. So like I'm curious if there might be some like seeing as how they're treating caching differently. I don't know what's happening internally at Anthropic, but maybe they're taking a different angle on this because they have a different. It could be like them inadvertently revealing internal details, like their architecture is kind of leaking out in a very subtle way. But it also could just be that they have a very different direction that they're trying to go with it in the same way that like leadership at Anthropic has like Claude Code as the big product, and then like OpenAI is like, oh my God, we're gonna do this whole like social media slot machine. Like that's a different direction to go as a business. So they're like revealing intentions in different ways. So maybe the caching is kind of revealing intentions, or again, maybe I've just got like weird Friday brain.
No, I think that's 100% right. I think you can see there's kind of like branching opinions or I guess design frameworks here. I use Codex and Claude Code, and I know that they're different. I don't know exactly how the harness works. I'm sure some people in here do, but I'm assuming that there are different opinions in how to do this. And then also like listening to AMP and how they're approaching things with their model pairing and architecture is another interesting layer there as well, I guess. Yes, for my own app that I'm building here, I'm building like a base context. So let's just say that you're using this application here, you've pulled in different podcasts and papers that you're reading and researching. They're going into a SQLite database. When you interact with the app, I want the app to have contextual awareness. So I want it to know what the user is, like what their learning preferences are. I want it to reference previous conversations that they've had. And then I want the user to be able to pull into context different research items. One example is I'm working with a podcaster and they want to pull in all of their podcast transcripts and then use some of those podcasts to help them write a new article. So they need to be able to pull in like 4 or 5 previous podcasts and then 10 of their previous Substack articles. And then that all needs to be into context so that it can help them write something new or come up with a new idea. So I'm pulling all of this into context for the model. And so obviously this caching is really interesting to me because if I'm building a massive initial prompt, I need to know like at what point the quality starts falling off and then the price is massive as well. So that's what I've been kind of testing here. So in these notebooks, rather than just pull in anything. I'm actually like building a database at the start. So I put in a YouTube transcript, and then I also in the system prompt simulate my app. So I give it a lot of these initial user context items. And then I put something in here just so I could see that it was the different models were maintaining as the context got larger, and I was still getting that prompt caching result. So I said like speak like Yoda, classic Yoda test.
Yeah, it's a fun way to jam the context and to make sure that it's still sticking around and doesn't get evicted somehow.
Right, right on. So yeah, I've just been testing with these follow-up notebooks, which I also put in the Discord channel there, just to try and make sure that I can feed in a lot of context, and then I'm also able to get a good response. And then kind of at what point I need to start using the vector database rather than feeding in a transcript. And from my testing and my results, I was still way better off chunking, embedding, and using vector retrieval once I got over like an hour-long podcast. So the idea here is I put in a whole podcast transcript, I chunk and embed it into a SQLite database. I also put into the system message a bunch of user information. So memory items, their learning preferences, the stuff I said before, and then run a multi-turn conversation, and then make sure that the prompt caching is working and ensure that the quality of response is good. So I've just been doing that over the last couple of days. And then I've had to build a separate one for Claude to work. So in this notebook here, which was notebook 5, if anybody wants to test it themselves, I wasn't getting the cache hit with Claude because I was using OpenRouter. I had to then use the direct Anthropic API to get those savings. So if anybody on here has been able to use OpenRouter and get Claude caching to work, you would be my savior. So that's mostly it. I think the more interesting stuff is like caching doesn't really change the output, reduce the context length, or prevent context rot. And so, yeah, I'm interested. I love being in the Discord because there's lots of conversations happening at the moment around agentic memory.
Well, and
any thoughts?
I'm going to chime in on that as well, which is like, I actually think optimizing over much for the cache is going to make it harder to deal with the context drop problem, because one of the things that you can do if you're not buying into this pure chat mental model is you can say, hey, once we get past, for example, 20 different conversational steps or whatever, I'm going to take the first 10 and summarize them and essentially fold that context down so my next conversation doesn't have all of that creating context drop. And I think there's a bunch of different types of optimizations that you can make when you opt out of that model, but you're going to break your cache. So then it becomes a question of like, for your use case, how important are costs, right? Are you in a world where the incremental value delivery is such that you are not actually worried over much about optimizing those costs that much? And two, like how much do you need super long context versus you just can kind of fork new tasks or break things apart as you go?
I would just so I understand, when you say like the chat paradigm, are you basically saying that the responses API, just to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, it's kind of a way for OpenAI to force users or even developers into the chat paradigm, so they can't kind of custom structure and do things like you just said, like compress or...
I don't know that I would say they force it. I'm saying that it is by managing, to use the responsive API, a part of the abstraction it presents is that this thing that is going on is a conversation. And this conversation has an ID, and it has a list of messages that have happened previously that are managed by OpenAI. And so that means you can't do things like rewrite history. You can't do things like say, oh, you know what? We're 30 conversational steps in, and so those first 10 actually probably don't matter. I can replace them with a single message that is a summary of the conversation that happened up to that point, or things like that, right? Like you are not managing the full context being
in a way.
I call it context folding because it's conceptually like you're taking a large set of things and you were folding it to show only the like small parts that were deemed to be still relevant. And you can, conversation history is one example of that, but there's lots of other things you could do it for tool calls, right? You could like have a tool call that goes out and fetches a very large amount of content, and then as soon as the user starts showing intent about which parts of that content they care about, you could like replace the results of that tool call in. If you're using, for example, chat completions, where you're managing all of this, right? Replace that full content with just the part that turned out to be relevant. Like there's a bunch of different tricks you can play if you're managing your entire context that go away if you assume that previous quote unquote conversational steps are golden and stay as they are. Which, once again, that trade-off may be the right one, right? Like that may actually be accurate or the right approach. I'm blown away by the types of coding results I get from GPT-5, and they're very clearly opting into the responses API like it was designed around this. It's possible that the improvement in the models and the speed that you get because of the caching is enough that it just completely obviates the need for any of these like fancy context management tricks. But just coming back to this, when you allow the provider to manage your context, you limit the set of tools you have for managing context rot.
Yeah, there's just so many moving parts, which makes it difficult, right? Like it's obviously context dependent, but the thing that I find challenging is like at what point does the bit of lesson kind of eat some of the custom structure that you might put in place? It's hard to think about. It's hard to think about that stuff. And then it works the other way, right? Like when I saw the new context window length for some of these new models, I thought to myself, oh, this is amazing. Like most of the use cases aren't going to go anywhere near that token limit. But then what I found is like context rot starts happening at 10% of the context window in some places. And Chroma did a good podcast on this as well.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a cynic. I think the model providers oversell the extent to which they're just going to absorb everything. And I think they're already pretty clearly hitting the tops of their S curves, and many of the improvements are from better application architectures around it. OpenAI is doing some interesting things with stuff like the responsive API, where they're taking on layers of that application architecture. And because of that, able to do very powerful things, but also then you're stuck with their choices. So those powerful things may be the right choices, or they may just be the right choices for certain application domains.
Yeah, it's all trade-offs. It's all trade-offs.
Yeah, well, that's me done. I don't have to keep it open and have some more questions, or if anybody else has some thoughts.
So I guess like coming at this from a background in software on my end, and it sounds like on your end, you're like learning as you go, a lot of just-in-time learning and figuring out all this stuff. I mean, you went from presumably in the very recent history not having any real concept of what caching is, and now you've had to like figure out a lot and figure out how they're exposing it, how you can use it. I'm just curious, like, so it sounds like there's a lot of dog fooding going on, where like you've mentioned listening to lots of podcasts and watching lots of YouTube videos and keeping track of all these chats, and you're using this application to like support that, and also you're productizing it so it can become a sustainable project and hopefully like bring prosperity and also lots of value to everyone. But I'm just kind of curious, like we were talking about just there's so much going on, like the fire hose. So it sounds like this is your way to manage the fire hose and you're using it and you're learning while you're doing it. And that's how like learning caching was in service of this fire hose management tool that you're building in a way. I'd love to hear more about your learning process.
Yeah, I mean, it's all dog food for for me. I kind of just took a sabbatical a year and a half ago because I saw how powerful this technology was and how interesting all the tools are. And I started trying to take some courses. I did one course with a guy called Hugo Bown Anderson. He's got another great podcast on Maven. And as part of that, they just encourage you to build a project. So I started building this for myself. I was like, if I could have one thing, it would be like an AI aware Notion. I started building it for myself as that course project. And then I just kept building it. But then I quickly ran into like the proof of concept purgatory, which is like, it's really easy to build an application that works 90% of the time, but getting it to that last bit is really difficult. So now I've just been learning as much as possible to try and unslop my sloppy work.
You are most certainly not the only one.
Yeah.
You're in good company, as it were.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. And the last thing I'm interested in is like, I don't know if anybody has ideas or suggestions around memory, because when I looked at this caching thing is important. It was important not in the way I thought that it was important, because it's obviously not going to solve the long context or context rot issues, but it is then related in many ways to different alternatives, which I guess are just all these things that people are talking about in Discord, which is like, how do you manage tool calls, or how do you manage memory in agentic systems? And then just, I guess, also like the model pairing question. So I'm always interested in like, a guy came in here a few weeks ago and did a call. He was from AMP. I just found that really interesting, because if you listen to the AMP conversations, they do share quite openly how they're kind of prototyping model pairing. And that's the first time I kind of heard somebody at that level of product sharing how they use different models together. I just love to hear if anybody has a strong opinion on using GPT-5 as an orchestrator and then outsourcing to different sub-agents, or using Claude 4.5 to do that. And yeah, that's helpful to me. I often see people talking about that in Discord and try to implement things as quickly as possible.
So I haven't dug too deep into that either. Again, there's like this sort of breadth first, depth first problem here of like the breadth keeps increasing, the depth keeps increasing. And it's like, well, which path of this choose your own adventure AI agentic space do I want to actually dive into today? Or for a string of days to try to speed run to a product? Hearing what different people are doing, especially like you were saying about more mature products and how they're approaching things. But then there's so much out there to sift through to figure out how should I be navigating that, applying that to my product is challenging. Those questions might get some traction in the channel over the next few days, but these are conversations that are going to be continuing to happen as we're learning more every day, every week, every month, and new models drop, new features come out, all that craziness. And we're just still getting hit with the fire hose and trying to drink as much as we can.
Yeah, it's a fire hose indeed. I mean, if anybody listens to this and they want me to test some version or variation of prompt caching, let me know. Or yeah, again, I put the GitHub. So if you just want to pinch some of the workbooks to run this yourself, feel free to do so.
So just to make sure I understand, this has been mostly about you figuring out how to use provided versions of caching. I haven't really heard too much about like managing caching on your end. Like, but I guess that's not really how these API calls work. Like if you did some caching, maybe you don't make the API call, but that doesn't really make a difference because you still have to make the API call. I should not have gone out so late last night, but here we are.
I don't know the full answer to this as well, but I'll do my best to give my interpretation, because I spoke to somebody in the Discord about it, right? So there's a couple of different ways to approach caching. There's provider caching, which we just talked about now, which is you're just trying to hit the provider API. You could also set up some kind of middleware. Like, again, I don't know if I'm going to use the right terminology here, but you could set up something in the middle which would basically catch the provider response on your end. And so if you have a user that asks a specific question twice over, the exact same question, you can just avoid them going to the provider API altogether. So
Right,
like
but then like if they're asking the same question twice, they might be trying to get a different answer, and then it's like, well, I've cached it and it's not really helping.
Exactly that. I can't think of, I'm sure there are other use cases. Like the use case that I thought of was if you had some kind of FAQ bot and different users are asking a similar, I guess, that they want the same response to a specific FAQ question. That's the only kind of example I could think of that would be beneficial in production to
And they're
try and,
actually there's a guy on the server who's building a product that is basically an FAQ bot, and he did a
right.
presentation a few months back, and that's definitely a use case that makes sense. So that actually I should probably ping him in the channel or something. I don't think he's in the
Yeah.
call.
I guess even like prototyping prompting, that would be another case where you basically want to avoid going to the provider API altogether if you can, if you're prototyping.
Right, but then there's always the trade-off of like, well, how much engineering effort do I apply to this, or how many
Exactly.
cycles of effort do I apply to trying to vibe code this thing when like what's the real output? Like for you, you noticed that when you changed models, your cost basis went up dramatically for certain customers. And now it's like, well, okay, caching is very urgent now because like this is getting very expensive and you might be underwater on certain customers.
So it's better, it's financially better for me just to prototype with Haiku instead of Sonnet rather than try to set up my own caching because I'm a bit of a noob on that end. But yeah, I guess that's the only other time that you would do that kind of middleware caching, prototyping, or very specific use cases where you're going to get exactly the same prompt and response.
Well, this was a cool introduction to all this provider side caching stuff. I had no idea how different they were each approaching it, and this is the first time I find I kind of gloss over when there's blog posts, and I find keeping track of all the different podcasts can get a little overwhelming. So usually like this is how I'm able to kind of manage the fire hose is like other people manage the fire hose and then come up with an abbreviated version of a various topic, presentation. So thank
Yeah,
you.
well, if you have trouble keeping up with all the content and resources and podcasts and papers, I have an app for you.
Oh, yeah, I guess this is where you plug, right?
Yeah, I'm not going to
And then you
plug
have
yet.
another thing you have to keep track of.
Yeah, exactly. Another application.
No, we're just about at time, so I will jump in it really quickly too. Yeah, reiterating that, thank you for this, Brad. Both very helpful summary and interesting and useful discussion. And I too, Zach, you're not alone. Like I absolutely use this discussion group as a way to sort of surface up the relevant things a lot of times. So that's great. So I believe we are without a speaker for next week, and then for the next 2 weeks we are open, and then we have someone's already signed up for the week after that, I believe. So that means if you're here and you're still listening, there's not very many of you, but I'm looking at you to propose some topics or bring something forward, and we can have this discussion in Discord as well. But let's keep the interesting topics happening.
It doesn't
And
have to be polished, just has to be interesting, right?
exactly, doesn't have to be polished, doesn't even have to be useful, it just has to be interesting.
Oh, like when
I
we did like the Claude turtles all the way down thing last week.
Yeah, Claude
That
turtles
was
all the way
fun.
down. I still remember things that are not obvious how they're going to be useful, but then end up being incredibly useful, like the deep dive into Silly Tavern. That ended up being so useful for me eventually. Like lots of different random ass stuff that
And
you would
I
never
was
predict.
totally shooting from the hip on that one, and that was like this past winter, I think. But that was a fun one, yeah.
So yeah, it could be random niche projects. That one in particular was interesting because they were doing some very advanced stuff on the prompting side that allowed
For
us to learn quite a bit, even though the general use cases on it may not be as commonly applied. Yeah, I mean that's probably come a long way too. So if somebody wants to bring back a deep dive into Silly Tavern, and we can go into our 5,000 line JavaScript code that intermingles advanced prompting techniques with script kiddie bad HTML generation. We
Back
can
the
do it.
planet.
All right. Cheers, y'all. Have a great weekend. We'll see you
Thanks,
next
y'all.
week. Hopefully, we can get somebody to bring something. All right. Bye.
Later.